but you're worthy of love and belonging. I think that's it. This is why we're here. Not just parents, but at church. All of us, all the time. You are worthy of love and belonging. That's it. That's James Luther Adams' Ecclesiology. Ecclesiology is a theological term that theologians use to refer to the makeup, role, and functions of a church congregation, as well as how the church behaves internally and its role and function in the society that it exists within. My absolute favorite ecclesiology comes, no surprise for me, from James Luther Adams, our Unitarian theologian of last century, who says, church is the place we go to practice being human. At its best, church is the place we practice being human. The most important aspects of being human we are called to practice at church, I think, are relationships. Church is a place you can practice friendship, partnering if we attend with a partner or are partnered, parenting, even citizenship in our activism and justice work and community involvement. We also practice all the practical skills required for healthy relationships of all types: communication, empathy, cooperation, sympathy, conflict and conflict resolution, how to make mistakes well, how to apologize and forgive, how to be imperfect, and vulnerability. We can also practice the virtues vulnerability requires of us, such as courage and self-esteem and loyalty and hope and justice. Brené Brown says something about parenting in her work that I think applies to all our relationships, especially and including church. She says, all too often we try to be perfect and try to make our children perfect and spare them as much pain and struggle as possible. But, she notes, children are hardwired for struggle when they arrive here. Our job is not to keep them perfect. Tennis team by 5th grade, acceptance TL by 7th grade. Our job is to tell them, you're imperfect and you're wired for struggle and you will struggle. But you're worthy of love and belonging. I think that's it. This is why we're here. Not just parents, but at church. All of us, all the time. You are worthy of love and belonging. That's it. That's James Luther Adams' Ecclesiology. I want to take a little trip into Brené Brown's research. If you know Brené Brown, great. If you don't, if there's only one of our thematic resources you check out this month, please, 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 please watch Brené Brown's TEDx Houston talk from 2010, The Power of Vulnerability. You won't be disappointed. And before I get into a little summary of Brené Brown, I do want to recognize that there have been critiques of her work, especially the major critique that vulnerability is for middle-aged white women. That vulnerability can be deadly to the marginalized, the oppressed, and the persecuted. Noted. However, something I love about Brené Brown is that she took this criticism, as difficult as it was to hear, and engaged it. Instead of practicing white fragility and denying the criticism or refuting it and running from it, She practiced what she preached. Her most recent work, Atlas of the Heart, Mapping Meaningful Connection in the Language of Human Experience, has input from and collaboration with colleagues of color. It has chapters on what meaningful connection looks like and does not look like when things like racism and white privilege and microaggressions pop up. It has graphic novel type illustrations of conversations that show how to do these interactions wrong and how to do them better. So I was a fan of hers before this. I'm a bigger fan now. Nothing like watching somebody practice what they preach. Remember that later? I got it? Okay. From the reading, Brené Brown defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. That stinks. Boy, that is not fun. Vulnerability means opening ourselves up to the possibility of further harm, hurt. Why wouldn't this be considered a weakness? A potentially devastating, for some people, deadly weakness. But she argues it is not weakness. She came to study vulnerability through research done studying what she calls wholeheartedness and human connection. Wholeheartedness, she says, is, quote, the capacity to engage in our lives with authenticity, cultivate courage and compassion, and profoundly embrace the imperfections of who we really are. Her research found that the only difference between wholehearted people and everybody else was that wholehearted people felt they were worthy of love and belonging. That's it. She says vulnerability can often deal with shame, fear, worthlessness, but it's also the birthplace of joy and creativity and belonging in love. Because none of us like being vulnerable, she says, we numb vulnerability. And the problem with numbing emotions is you cannot selectively numb only the ones you don't like. When you numb emotions, you can't just numb the fear and the shame and the grief without numbing the joy and the gratitude and the compassion and love. As my favorite theologian Bruce Springsteen sings, you can't shut off the risk and the pain without losing the love that remains. I could get by with Bruce and James Luther Adams. My favorite section in her TEDx Houston talk is when she discusses religion and politics, two of my favorite subjects. She notes that to avoid feeling vulnerable, we make anything uncertain into certainties. Religion, she says in the talk, used to be about mystery, wonder, how to be the best person we could. Now it's about certainty and whether or not your certainty is the correct one. And hint, it's not correct if it's not mine. And the same thing with politics, she says. I agree. It should be, I think, about how we have disagreements in a group, in a society, and find enough common ground to live together and solve our problems. But in reality, politics works out to be all about enforcing upon others all the things our side needs to not feel all the yucky, difficult emotions like vulnerability and fear and shame. When Brené Brown says blame is a way we discharge our pain and discomfort, and blame fills up our religion and politics today. Now, I think that most Unitarian Universalists will think, hey, that's great, but that's the MAGAs, that's not me. And boom, that's exactly what she's talking about. We discharge our pain and discomfort blaming the others. It's all their fault. The woke do it to the MAGAs, and the MAGAs do it to the woke, and we all do it to each other. That's her point. She says people who are wholehearted, however, do not practice this. People who are wholehearted do not practice perfectionism, judgment, exhaustion as a status symbol, productivity as self-worth, needing to be cool, worrying about what other people think, performing for others, proving yourself to others, or searching for certainty. Wholehearted people instead practice courage. They show up as their genuine, authentic selves without guarantees of acceptance, love, or success. And this runs counter to so much of our American life and our congregational life. Most congregations and church leaders won't try anything that members might be upset with or isn't guaranteed to succeed. We're just like everybody else. Vulnerability is not only courageous, it has the benefit of building trust. In her book, Braving the Wilderness, she says that she loves Charles Feltman's definition of trust and distrust. And he says, quote, choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. That's trust. Distrust is deciding that what is important to me is not safe with this person or this situation or any situation. All right, I know that's a lot of Brene Brown research, but it's good to have that common grounding to jump into an entire sermon, but also an entire month of the theme of vulnerability. So we have at church a lot of opportunities to practice all this wholeheartedness and vulnerability. So let's take a look at where some of those are. It is a well-known trope in ministry that 95% of pastoral care gets done at coffee hour. Every time we go to coffee hour, we engage conversation with people, most of us do. And that casual conversation is usually casual. Although church leaders, and especially ministers, we listen real deep when you think we're just having a casual conversation. But casual conversation can be a time to really practice vulnerability. In our culture, we ask, how you doing? And in our culture, that actually just means hi. If we want to practice vulnerability, we'll say, no, really, how are you today? We're vulnerable because we're exposing ourselves to actually listen to how someone really is. And even scarier, we're asked to actually share the reality. It's not the simplest thing to just jump up and start practicing. It takes courage. But we can practice courage in something as simple as talking with someone else over coffee. Every Sunday, we invite people up here to light candles and share a bit of what's on your heart. That's a great opportunity to practice being vulnerable. Joys and concerns, joys and sorrows, plenty of pros and cons. One of the reasons that some people try to shy away from it, especially in bigger congregations, is it's a practice for small groups. It invites vulnerability, which usually requires some kind of connection and trust. It's a loop. We started this practice up again when we started meeting in person again after COVID let us get back together, because we needed that connection building. Joys and sorrows, that kind of sharing, that's a great pastoral opportunity that we grant to each other, and we all need it. In larger churches, if you've got 212 people in the sanctuary, you can't just open the mic up. You could be there for 2.5 hours, especially if your congregation is good at practicing vulnerability. So you got to find out a different way to handle that. Hopefully, I'd love for us to have that problem. And we might get there and we'll deal with it. But it's an interesting opportunity. And I want to encourage people to use it as that time to be a little vulnerable, right? We don't want to, at Joys and Concerns, make political statements or argue about something or make announcements about something that's going on. Now, can you share something about how we always feel this tension about, well, if we spend too much time checking in, we don't have enough time to do our work. The work isn't nearly as important. Let it wait. The most productive church board I ever worked with spent a good 30 to 45 minutes on check-in at every one of their 2-hour meetings every month. They got more done in that remaining hour-ish than probably any other board I've ever worked with meeting for 2 or 3 hours at a time. Because their relationships with each other got so deep that they eliminated virtually all petty talk, squabbles and disagreements, and knew when somebody was offering something because something was going on with them. And it was really great. It gets difficult to get into that because we're afraid of the vulnerability. Even as a group, if we put so much time into that, we may not get enough done. What's more important than deepening those relationships? You will make the rest of the time in those meetings so much more effective. Use it as a small group. My friend Eric Walker Wickstrom, in his book, Serving with Grace, Lay Leadership as Spiritual Practice, makes this point over and over again. The most important point of your leadership is as a spiritual practice. How can you practice being human? How can you practice vulnerability and courage and sharing and taking care of each other? Right? Those of us who feel like we always got to speak first, try not speaking at all. Guarantee, 90% of the time someone else will say what you were going to say anyway. You've practiced vulnerability, and they've practiced vulnerability. Stepping up, stepping back. Perhaps the most intense, great, wonderful, awesome way we can practice vulnerability in a congregation, in my opinion, is small group ministry. It is designed to be a vulnerability incubator. It is designed to deepen relationship and deepen connection and make us more wholehearted. Small groups are so great at this because they are designed, at least in the way we advertise and promote small groups in Unitarian Universalism, the Parker Palmer Circle of Trust methodology, which is no teaching, no fixing, no setting each other straight. It's about listening to each other. No crosstalk, no getting into discussions or arguments. The way it's designed to work is you create and deepen trust by being able to share whatever is in your heart without worrying about whatever coming back at you. Accept support and acceptance. And when that happens often enough, the thing it's really designed to do is to get each individual to be able to better hear their own heart. Now, this can be difficult for some people because a lot of times when we get together, we want to discuss things. We want to talk about things. We want to debate and share ideas. That's awesome. Just there's another place for that. The small group is a vulnerability incubator. It's an emotional exercise, not an intellectual one. Are there other times we want to discuss and set up those conversations and all that kind of stuff? Yes, that's great too. They're just two different things with two different purposes at their center. If you are in a small group, good for you. Yay, we love that. If you are not, I would like us to try and start at least one or two small groups. There are some congregations, including UU congregations, where being a member of a small group is a requirement of membership. I don't know if we have to do that, but I think promoting small groups more would be great for us. It's great for every congregation. Pastor of a Methodist megachurch once told me that all big churches like mine are collections of small churches that get together on Sunday for worship. Because once your congregation gets big enough, you can't know everybody. You can't be friends with everybody. It's too big. But you can have that church within a church that is your people, your group, your vulnerability cohort, your pastoral care center. As he said at some other thing that same weekend, he said the pastoral caring groups are so important. We have over 5,000 members here. If you get sick and go to the hospital, don't call me. I may not have even met you yet. Call your small group facilitator. That's what's going to generate all the people taking care of you. Yes, I would love to know, and I will check in. But that small group is the center of what's going to take care of you. Vulnerability is awesome. Why so much attention to vulnerability? Well, it's not an idle exercise or another cool thing we should do if we can get around to it. The more we practice vulnerability and wholeheartedness and courage, the more we're able to use our privilege to fight for those whose chance at practicing vulnerability is limited, who might be in real danger to their personal safety, even their lives, by being vulnerable. Right now in our country, there are laws being proposed, even passed, that ban public drag shows. I don't know when the last time you saw a public drag show was, but I can't recall one. But 26 bills targeting drag shows have been filed in 14 states in the last 2 months. Laws are being proposed and passed that target our transgender siblings. Translegislation.com is a site that tracks anti-trans legislation. So far in 2023, that's not even 60-something days, right? So far in 2023, anti-trans bills are being introduced across the country that seek to block trans people from receiving health care, basic education, legal recognition, and the right to exist. This year alone, 2 months, 432 anti-trans bills have been introduced in 41 state legislatures, including 5 here in Connecticut. 8 of those bills have already been passed. 390 are still active. 34 have failed already. The 5 in Connecticut are still alive. Call your state reps and senators when you go home. Translegislation.com. This kind of stuff is what happens when timid, scared, closed-hearted, closed-minded people living in an uncertain world become terrified of things they don't understand. And they seek certainty in uncertainty. They need someone to blame for their fear and inability to be vulnerable and show up with their real emotions as they really are. So they want to try and make it illegal to just be a certain kind of human being. Wholehearted people don't need to scapegoat others, peddle hatred, engage fear, or dehumanize anybody, because we practice courage. Just this week, I signed a public letter from the Liberal Religious Educators Association calling on the UUA at the national and congregational level to actively mobilize to protect our trans families and all trans families. Among the congregational recommendations are offering the course Transgender Inclusion in Congregations that was produced by the Transforming Hearts Collective, and continue the work of moving towards inclusion of all those with targeted identities. We have been asked to invest in religious education resources, specifically for trans and questioning children and youth, to offer OWL not only to the community, if we're offering it, but to anyone who wants to take it, and to support Unitarian Universalist families who are fleeing their homes in states where their children's right to exist is being made illegal. This is work for all of us. Maybe we can make a task force with a representative or more from the Religious Education Committee, Social Justice Coordinating Team, the Membership Committee, the board, me, and anybody else who wants to do it. Friday, March 31st is the annual Trans Day of Visibility. I'm hoping that we can make sure something happens in our community to mark that day. I have to say, I will probably be in Meriden that day because we had a trans member of the community commit suicide this year. So I'll probably be at their celebration. Nothing against all of us, right? I think they need that a little bit more this year. But we can make sure we look at how we might do some of those Loretta recommendations. Yes, we've got a lot of other stuff to do. Doing some of these won't take a whole lot of extra stuff from most of us. I think we can get that done. This week, the local clergy association here will be meeting, and I will make sure that they are encouraged to support whatever Trans Day of Visibility event we can get off the ground or make happen, and that they continue to keep this in mind. I'm going to tell them my story of the funeral I did last month. There's so much hate and cruelty. It can really be easy to forget how much good there is. Vulnerability. But something about vulnerability is it creates hope. Brene Brown says hope is not an emotion. It's a cognitive behavioral process that stems from overcoming adversity. When we encounter difficulty and get through it and work together, we create hope by our struggle and our success. Hope is a process of resiliency, having faith that you can get through it because you have before. And hope is one of the essential foundational marks of a liberal religion. James Luther Adams taught us hope is the belief that there are enough divine and human resources to justify ultimate, if not immediate, optimism. So church is the place where we practice being human, which means it's the place we practice vulnerability and courage and wholeheartedness and hope and not being afraid to cry in front of other people. So let's deepen this practice together and create a congregation that can proudly and boldly proclaim our ecclesiology. You are worthy of love and belonging.
Thanks a lot for watching this video. It would help me out a great deal if you liked the video to give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this video with others, maybe ring that notification bell so you can be informed when we put out other videos like this. Check out my website and blog at tonylorenzen.com for even more resources that will open your mind, touch your heart, and inspire your spirit.